to start the big cat session right now, specifically big cats, which are the biggest problem I see right now in the country. There are a limited number of elephants, but tigers especially is the biggest problem, I think, as far as finding homes. And there are a lot of people here that are working on that right now. Our first speaker is Howard Baskin. He's advisory board chairman for Big Cat Rescue. He's a former management consultant. He spent 11 years in Citicorp. He was an equity participant and a general manager in 3 companies. He met Carol Baskin, the founder of Big Cat Rescue, in 2002. And this sounds very familiar, Howard. This is kind of what happened to me, except I didn't have the credentials you have. He gave up his consulting practice to devote himself full-time to Big Cat Rescue. He received his B.S. cum laude from Union College in Schenectady, New York, his J.D. cum laude from the University of Miami Law School, and his MBA from Harvard Business School. He has just bumped by me in the education department big time. And it takes people with, I've always said, a business mind to attack these problems is exactly what we need, and we have a big influx now in the last 10 or 12 years. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from Howard Baskin. Thank you.
What I'm going to talk to you about is not something I consider myself an expert in. I'm going to talk to you from our personal experience and from some private conversations over the years with senior people at USDA. Some of it will have overlap with what Nicole did, but from a different perspective, driving down to what actually happens on the ground, the next regulation we got. There are 3 basic federal animal laws under the Animal Welfare Act, is the Department of Agriculture, and so most of what happens in our regulation and these inspections that we're talking about is in a department of the U.S. Department of the division of the Department of Agriculture called APHIS. So those are the people who are supposed to enforce the law that says these animals are supposed to be kept in humane circumstances. You saw a version of this from Nicole, and I just want to drill down onto one thing. The ZAA has done something very clever. The first clever thing was making themselves in a way that's confusing with ATA. And the second thing is they hired a very articulate, smooth, very experienced lobbyist who had worked for many years at state government levels around the country. And the first time I heard this guy speak in front of a state legislative committee, I sat there and thought, oh my God, he is turning this, what is the expression? Pig's ear into a silk purse, sow's ear into a silk purse. I mean, this guy is very articulate. He positions them as, we're the little guys, Daisy, don't beat up on us little, businessmen. And he's very effective at it, despite the fact that what he's saying is not true. This is mostly a group of roadside suits. I want to talk for a second about this USDA exception, because it sounds great that we have all these states that have some kind of ban or permit. This is a picture of the USDA application, and there are 12 questions. The hard ones are name and address, and depending on how many animals you have, the fee runs between $40 and $310. Now, theoretically, you're supposed to have experience. I've not gotten anyone at USDA who can provide me with any convincing evidence that there's a serious look at the experience level. One big issue, though, is the one Nicole pointed out. If you look down at the bottom here, so if you look down at the bottom, you'll see categories of animals. So there's guinea pigs, hamsters, and what we hear from some of the bad guys is that they can go get an application for hamsters. They come and inspect the hamster cages, and at renewal time, they sign up for tigers. And while USDA and they say there's inspection, experience shows that there isn't, and that's how they end up with tigers. One of the issues related to this, aside from the difficulties with enforcement with the exhibitors, is the extent to which the USDA exemption is used by pet owners. In 2010, the Office of the Inspector General, who does audits about every 5 or so years of USDA, did a survey for it and found that of the people that had 4 big cats or less, 70% of them were just pet owners who just got a USDA license in order to evade the state law. And there's virtually no enforcement by USDA to look and say, are they really an exhibitor? And what's an exhibitor? Is it having your neighbor come and look at the cat once a year? There are no rules about that, so they get away with that. And so we have these regulations that say at state level and federal level, the animals are supposed to be cared for in a humane way. And yet we see images like this constantly. And some of these are pictures of cats that are now in big cat rescue. The first problem is that what the law requires USDA, and in many cases the states do, is set minimum standards. And if you think about it, if my left hand, if there's a spectrum of care, and my left hand is outright abuse, and my right hand is what most of us would think of as humane, well, it's pretty easy to define outright abuse. When you think about it, it's not beating the animal, it's not depriving the animal of food, water, or medical care, and it's giving the animal some kind of shelter. And so if we look at the regulations, first of all, many of the regulations are geared toward public safety, which the Animal Welfare Act, I don't believe, even mentions. And the regulations that are there are designed to get you just from here to here, not over here where animals have a reasonable amount of space to be in and get enrichment and things like that. So you start out with very weak regulations. In Florida has one of the more generous laws regarding how much space you need to give tigers. In Florida, you can keep 2 500-pound tigers in a 10 by 24 concrete slab chain link box with some kind of shelter in it. And as long as you cannot be proved not to be giving food or medical care or water, you have met the requirements. Think about that. That's like you taking your domestic cat. If you think about that size relative to the weight of these animals, it would be like taking your domestic cat and keeping it in maybe a mid-sized dog carrier for its entire life. It makes absolutely no sense. We went to visit with the Florida regulators and said, look, this makes no sense. It should be bigger. And they said, well, in order to change the rules, we have to have science behind it. And their problem is, if they go and do things that they can't justify in some way, then all the bad guys gang up on them and file lawsuits. So they want to do things that they can prove. So they want to get science. Well, how do you come up with the science of how big the cage specifically should be? So we said to them, well, what's the science behind 10 by 24? Nobody had an answer to that. But keep in mind, many of these regulations are decades old. And you've seen a dramatic difference in public perception of how animals should be treated over the last 20 or 30 years. The elephants are the best example. The attitudes about the circus. So, there's not going to be likely an effort to change that rule in Florida. And at the end of our tours at the sanctuary, after people hear the stories of the cats, we show them this space that these 2 interns are standing in. The bigger space is the one that you keep the tigers in, and there's a tiny box. It's a little hard to see here that the intern on the left is standing in. We say, that would be like you living in that tiny box by weight. And then we ask people if they would help by calling the legislators about the bill that you'll hear about later. And just to digress for a minute, if you think about the issue of should big cats be in cages at all, these are animals that are genetically built to roam many, many miles. The mileage depends, how big a space depends on the species and how much prey is there, but it's always many miles. So, we don't have the luxury of 2,300 acres. We have 67. So, one good thing about that is Carol can't come from her room and say, take 39 tigers. But recently, I do our finances. Recently, I agreed that we could afford to take in 4, which is the most we've ever taken, and suddenly it became 6 without asking me. So, in a smaller way, I think I empathize with Ed's situation. our biggest enclosure is about 2.5 acres, and we rotate the cats through. The first thing the cats do when they get into a new enclosure is go around the perimeter. Why? Because they want to see if they can get out, is what I believe. And even when they're in an enclosure for a long time, you still see them spending a significant amount of time investigating the perimeter. The people who exploit the animals, I've heard them argue that this life in a cage is better than life in the wild because you get fed regularly, you don't have to hunt, and there aren't periods of time where you can't find food, and you're not facing challenges like floods or droughts and things like that. Well, think about that. That would be like arguing that human beings are better off in prison, right? Where you get food and shelter and don't have to deal with all the challenges of life. I doubt if any of you would make that choice and feel that was a better life. And if you did, it's not that hard to arrange. You can go down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and unlike some people, you would probably not get away with it. These numbers change over time. I talked to USDA last week, and right now there are 104 inspectors. And these are a combination, roughly half of them are people with veterinary degrees. And the other half are people with backgrounds that have a basis for doing this and get training. And let me just say that while there are certainly times when we feel like the inspectors don't do what they should, and USDA doesn't do what it should, a number of these people that we've met over the years are really good people who really want to do something with the animals and are as frustrated as we are. Unfortunately, the people who are like that, sometimes get so frustrated at their inability to do something for the animals that they end up quitting and lose some of the good ones. The number of licensees now showing on the USDA website it actually changed in the course of my doing this, but it's basically about 7,700, of which 2,600 are exhibitors. Of those, about 700 are people who exhibit big cats. Of those people, there were 879 inspections. So it's basically 1.26 inspections per facility. Now keep in mind, that's probably one a year or less for many places because some of these places can have 6 or 8 inspections during the year. And overall, the number of inspections was about 10,000, which does not include, some of them have to inspect under the Horse Protection Act as well. It doesn't include that. So, that big number comes out to be very similar. So I asked, you take the number of inspections and divide it by the number of inspectors, and it comes out to about 94 a year. So I asked, well, why is it that? That's, a couple a week. Why can't they do more? And there are reasons for this. One of the biggest is the long distances. It's not like a delivery route where you can plan, okay, we're going to do this extremely efficiently. They have big territories. In some cases, you may have to visit a place on one side of the state and go to a place on the other side of the state. So a huge amount of their time is spent traveling. And then when I asked a senior USDA official, what else do they spend time on? I got this list of things, one of which is when they do have an enforcement case, the inspector has to testify and take days out to be in court. And the number of these outreach activities, various meetings and conferences, administrative duties, training, things like that, and then the horse show inspections. So there are a number of other things they do. And we could argue, well, maybe they shouldn't be doing some of the things, maybe they should inspect more. But the bottom line is they end up with this 1.27 inspections per facility, and that's what they're able to do. Then, if you get inspectors, once you get enough citations, and this typically takes years of citations, if you're really, really bad, now keep in mind that these rules are pretty minimal, so you have to be really, really bad to keep getting serious citations. After years of serious citations, they can turn it over to an investigator. There's a separate department called IES, Investigative and Enforcement Services, that does the investigation. They're the ones, and we'll talk about what they do. But they do more than animal welfare cases. This is the animal and plant division, right? So I was able, through about 43% of their time is spent on animal care cases, and that translates to something like 30 some odd of these people are available to do this. In 2011, their backlog was 2,000 cases, and of those, 861 were the animal care cases. And the average time it was taking to deal with a case was 20 months. Now keep in mind, you've got years of citations and now almost 2 years for the investigator to do them. During this time, the animals continue to suffer. So the USDA made a significant effort to reduce the caseload. Well, the first thing they did was to say, okay, we're going to take a large number of them that we determine are the weakest of them and simply send out warning letters to people saying, don't do it again, or don't do it anymore. Now keep in mind, these are cases that even to get to them, these people had to be really doing a lot of bad things for a long time, and about half of them just went away by sending out a warning letter. And then they did some process improvements they talk about. So that got the level down to what they said was 11 months instead of 20 months in 2014. So you're still talking about, from the time the investigator, from the time the inspector sent it to investigator, about a year. Now, if they also, APHIS does not have lawyers. They have to rely on the general counsel's office, whose lawyers are torn in many directions and have many priorities. So in order for them to actually get to the point where they bring a suit, they have to get a lawyer from the general counsel's office, and any lawsuit is a very expensive proposition in terms of time to prepare a lawsuit well and to actually go to court and spend maybe a week or more in court. So you have to have, they want to have a very, very powerful case in order to do that. So what actually happens now? This is the framework. What actually happens on the ground? If an inspector comes and you don't let them in, that's a violation. But the only penalty is you get a citation. So we see some cases where they simply turn away the inspector for, the inspector comes back months later and they turn away again. You see that happening repeatedly. Then, as I mentioned, if they're really bad and violate these very basic requirements, they get cited for years. And we're talking 5, 6, 7 years. Some go on way beyond that without just getting citations. If you're cited for something and you don't fix it, then the next time they come, they call it a repeat citation, which is in theory more serious than the original citation. But it still has to go through this process of getting to a point where they turn it over to an investigator. And once they turn it over, the investigator's job, if they're witnesses or complainants who have complained about the place, they have to go interview them, travel to interview them, and start to build this case. And that's the 11-month process on average that we talked about. And what's the outcome of that? If the investigator decides he has a case, he makes a decision to do one of two things. Either sends a warning letter saying stop doing this, or he makes a settlement offer, which they call a stipulation. Now, why do they want to settle the cases? Because the legal resources to pursue these cases are enormously expensive, and they can only do a limited number of them. Keep in mind, you're talking about hundreds of these cases. In 2008, Congress realized that the level of penalty they had for a citation of $3,750 was too low. So they raised it to $10,000 specifically for the purpose of making these penalties more of a deterrent so that people would not do things because there were higher penalties involved. But the USDA has a series of discounts off of this. Now, that's $10,000 for each citation, and if they're cited and it continues, they can actually, as I understand it, find them that daily until it's fixed. So you can easily rack up tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in nominal citation amount. But there's this chart that the USDA does, and very quickly they can discount, depending on the size of the business. They try to give deference to smaller businesses, so they can discount at 50% for those, up to 30% if they have not so bad a prior history, 17% based on the gravity, 25% if they decide the person was acting in good faith, which is violated the law. And the big one is they can discount, after those discounts, up to 75% if the person's willing to settle and agree to the stipulation rather than go to court for the reason that we just talked about, because court is so expensive. So if you run through this, if they gave all of these discounts to someone, the discount would be 99.6%. OIG did an audit in 2014 and found that the average discount was 86%. And so we're talking about, after all of this, and think about how much money the government spent to get to this point, you're talking about fines of a few $1,000s, all right? Which is not a deterrent, it's simply a cost of doing business. If they fail to settle, if they don't agree to the stipulation, then the investigator then takes it to the Office of the General Counsel to see if a lawyer is willing to take the case. And they have to decide if it's strong enough to go to court. And so you spend more months building that case and getting on a court calendar. Very, very few actually go to court. And usually the court cases, most of them tend to take 1 to 2 years based on looking at from when they were filed and when they were concluded. But there's examples like the notorious Colonel Mitchell, who lost his license in 2001, continued to have visitors, racked up $86,000 in fines, which he hasn't paid, and is still managing to fight it without, still doing what he was penalized for doing. Then you look at what happens in court. And so we went through 14 years of cases, which took an enormous amount of time plotting out what actually happened in these cases. We found 140 cases that involved big cats, so that's an average of only 10 a year. Of those, 64 of them were fined. And of those, 33 were fined $10,000 less by the judge, not by USDA, by the judge. And this is part of the USDA's problem. They take these cases to court, and the judge says, well, I don't want to put this small guy out of business, we'll just make the fine a few $1,000s. Now imagine how much the USDA has spent to get to that point. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money to take a horrible guy to court and be fined $5,000. Only 54 of those licenses were revoked in all 14 years, so about 4 a year out of these 700 licensees that have big cats. So the bottom line is most of them get small fines, very few lose their license. Now, if they do lose their license, that doesn't mean the cats are taken away. It just means they can't have visitors. USDA's authority is only over exhibitors. And so the animals continue to live at these places in these horrible circumstances. What USDA has explained to me is that they have their ability to confiscate an animal under the law is under a very, very narrow, hard to meet criteria that requires a health emergency. The animal has to be virtually in immediate danger of dying or I'm not sure if there's anything short of dying, but it qualifies. So it happens extraordinarily seldom times. And so you get examples that we've dealt with because we've ended up with some of these cats, a place called Animal House in Alabama, where this woman was just horrible for years, and finally lost her license. Keep in mind, very few lose their license. So she went down to her county and got a license to be an animal shelter and started taking in dogs and cats under the guise of being a shelter. She was feeding the dogs and cats to her big cats. So she put a leopard, she put a Doberman in with a leopard. The Doberman fought back, ripped up the leopard's arm. We complained to every agency we could, vociferously had people write in. USDA said our hands are tied. She's no longer the licensee. She doesn't fall under our authority because she stopped exhibiting, which is all we control. And so nobody did anything. This leopard suffered for an extended period of time before it finally died. Another example is a horrible woman named Diana Court, who was in Ohio before the Ohio law. She had 6 big cats. She had not only declawed them, but defanged most of them. And and she would drug them, chain them down, and charge people a large amount of money to come in, take pictures holding the big cat. People kept getting hurt. She lost her license because people kept getting hurt because of the public safety, not because of the treatment of the animals. But once she lost her license, there was no follow-up enforcement. She just continued, in her case, she continued to operate, still exhibiting, and nobody did anything for 3 years. The only reason she got thrown off the property was she didn't pay rent for 3 years. And so the state could say, okay, we're now going to take the cats, and that's how we ended up with 4 of those cats. Then, if people do lose their license, and I'll remind you again, this is after this years-long expensive process, in many cases, we see them operating on someone else's license. So an example is a horrible place called JNK in New York, where the woman, after years, lost her license, so she had a daughter get a license. So the whole process starts all over again under this new license. And the only reason we end up with these cats is because the daughter and the mother had a falling out. The daughter said, well, fine, I'm not renewing this license. New York had one of those laws that said if you can't have the big cats unless you have a USDA license. And New York was one of the few states that actually chose to enforce that law and shut her down, and that's how we finally got those cats out there. This is Zeus, what he looked like when he arrived from JNK. Look at his back end. His fur looks awful. He's emaciated. This cat suffered for years during this process. This is Mickey, who came from Animal House. Mickey had somehow severed his ACL joints, his knees. If that had been treated right away, it would have been a fairly straightforward thing to do. But after a year of those bones knocking together, they don't fit anymore. And when he came to us, frankly, we agonized. We said, this guy has to be in such pain that maybe we shouldn't have him continue. But he was so spirited. He is just the most full of life cat we're ever going to meet. So he said, well, let's try. And we did 2 very expensive surgeries on his knees. It improved his walking and hopefully reduced the discomfort level. He's never going to be right, but that's an example of what happens. And despite not giving this veterinary care, this place continued. Then let's think about what happens when a USDA inspector arrives. What can they actually see? They don't do undercover work. They come to the gate, unannounced, but they come to the gate and say, I'm here to inspect. We know from whistleblowers at some of these bad places that the first thing that happens is everybody's trained to delay them. And what can they do? They say, well, the person who can show you around is across the property or taking a shower. There was recently a court case where the USDA inspector complained that he was always delayed. I said, well, if I'm in the shower washing my hair, I can't get there in 5 minutes. Well, that wasn't what was happening. They delay them, they get on the radio and say, fill up the water bowls, scrape up any poop that's laying around, and don't do anything you're not supposed to, like punching tiger cubs in the face to make them behave. So what can they see? They can see if there's something wrong with the cage. Keep in mind the cage requirements and size are minimal. If an animal condition is obvious, an open wound or emaciated, they can cipher that. They can cipher unsanitation, lack of sanitation in the food area or feces in the cage. But they are not going to see the abusive behaviors ever. They are not going to see someone disciplining tiger cubs in order to make them more manageable for petting, or the one place we know that shoves tiger cubs into a pool to charge people to swim with them. Do you know why they put them in the pool? First of all, they can charge more, but secondly, tiger cubs don't want to sit still. Think about when you've watched kittens when they're awake. They don't sit still, they're exploring and doing things. You shove them in the pool, they're swimming for their life. Thank you. That was my 2-minute warning. We're going to make it. So there's a limited amount that they can see even to enforce their limited things. Among the things that the Office of Inspector General does these inspections every 5 years or so, and one of the criticisms that they make is that the rules are unclear. I told you the Florida rule, 10 by 24. USDA's rule is the tiger has to be able to make normal postural and social adjustments. Anybody want to tell me what that means? Does it mean stand up and turn around? So no exhibitor knows how big a space they have to have. No inspector knows whether they can cite someone, and you see virtually no citations. And when I talked to a senior USDA person, I said, look, why don't you put a size to it? In addition to the answer about the science, she said, well, if we did it for tigers, we'd have to do it for all animals. Well, sit down in a limited day with a list of animals and come up with a common sense size. And that was the answer. The biggest one, though, is the one at the bottom. The fines, as we talked about, are so low, basically it costs it to make business. So even after all of this, if the fine is a few $1,000s, then it gives nobody incentive to follow the rules. Some of their rules are virtually impossible. The 4-week petting is an improvement, but the tracking of whether the animal's 4 weeks is on an honor system by the exhibitor, so you don't know if it's 4 weeks. And when they travel, they come to a place for a weekend show, we report them on a Friday, they're gone by the time an inspector can get there. That tech note that Nicole showed you also said that the cats, the cubs have to stay with their mother until they're at least 4 weeks, or as long as possible. We were excited about that because if you leave the cubs with the mother for 4 weeks or more, they become like feral cats. They become unsuitable for petting. But USDA has chosen not to enforce just that. What I've been told is they're reading the two together. They're only going to enforce it if they have evidence that the cubs are not only taken away, but being petted. So, ending exactly on time, the bottom line is the regulations simply can't work. It's not just, yeah, we can improve the regulations, but this system, it just can't work. The only solution is to not have big